Unknown unknowns. Well, unknown unknowns leap at you from places that you wouldn't expect. Because otherwise you would have planned for the damn things. So they're the things that are always like poking their beak up at you when you least expect it. They're just like, say, serpents in the Garden of Eden. That might be one way of thinking about it. You can't keep the damn snakes out of the garden. And that's because you can't make a bounded area and keep the complexity out of it. The complexity always sneaks back in. Try protecting your children from the internet, for example. You can't make a bounded circumstance and get rid of all the complexity. It always comes sneaking back in. So what would be an unknown unknown? This is a good one. Here, you have an intimate relationship. You've had it for 10 years. You trust your partner. So what does that mean? You know where you are. You know who you are. And you have a pretty good idea of where you're going. And then one day you'll find out that your partner has been cheating on you, not with one person, but with 3 people. And for the whole 10 years. Well, hypothetically, that comes as a shock. Although you may have ignored many intimations that such might be the case. Irrelevant. Let's say it comes as a shock. Well, what happens to you? Well, you don't know where you are. You don't know where you've been. That's interesting, eh? Because you think you know where you've been because you've already been there. But all of a sudden something can happen so that you are so flipped over that you don't even know where you were. So that means in some sense the past is dependent on the present. A very peculiar thing. You also have no idea where you're going. In terms of not knowing where you are, that's deep, eh? Because you might think, well, I thought I was in a marriage. That turns out to be wrong. I thought I knew who my wife or husband was. That turns out to be wrong. I concluded on the basis that I knew my wife, that I knew something about women. That turned out to be wrong. I thought I was in a relationship with someone I could trust. That is wrong. I don't know enough about trust. I'm obviously too gullible. And so what that does is throw virtually everything that's ever happened to me in severe doubt, right? That's the emergence of chaos. And that's this. Sometimes you're going from point A to point B, and something you don't expect manifests itself in the middle of your plan, but it's not such a catastrophe because you can just work around it. And then sometimes something pops up and like you just do not have a plan anymore. And so then you might ask yourself, just exactly where are you when you don't know where you are? And I would say, that's a place. And it's actually a place that's well documented in classic religious and mythological stories. That's chaos. The Taoists, for example, they believe that the world is made out of chaos and order. Well, order, that's where you are when what you do gets you what you want. Chaos, that's where you are when you have no idea what's going on. And you might ask, well, is there a way that you should act when you're in chaos? And the answer to that is, there better be, because it's a place you're going to visit several times during your life. And everyone visits that. That's why it's an archetypal story. That's the descent to the underground. The underground is that horrible place that lurks underneath all of our presuppositions. It's the frigid lake underneath the thin ice that everybody's skating on. And it's something that can manifest itself at any moment. That's partly why in the Taoist symbol, the black paisley is chaos, by the way, and the white paisley is order. In the order paisley, there's a little black dot. Well, that's because order can turn into chaos, and does, at any moment. And the reverse is also true. Chaos can turn into order at any moment. And insight will do that for you. You know, alcoholics report that when they hit bottom. It's like there's a catalysis and they look at the world in a different way. You know, now they're a new person. They're back from the underground. They've risen from the dead, so to speak. You know, and it's partly because what looks like your right hemisphere is pretty good at inferring patterns in novel and chaotic places. It's kind of keeping track of things that happen to you that are anomalous. And it makes alternative maps of the world that are there for you to rely on, at least to some degree, if that ever becomes necessary. Order surrounded by chaos, right? It's like a tree. It's like the evolutionary home of primates, the tree with the snakes on the ground. That's our landscape. Or it's the fire for tribal people and the terrors of the forest that are beyond the light that the fire casts. It's explored territory versus unexplored territory. And that's That's an archetype as well. You can't not be in a situation where that's the case. Even if you're among friends, you know. You think that's explored territory. That's not exactly right, because what happens if you're among friends is that they carefully reveal new parts of themselves all the time. So it's like they're blasting little elements of unexplored territory at you constantly. And if they don't, then what happens? You get bored and you look for new people. And we know there's empirical data on that with regards to intimate relationships, because there was a nice study done a while back showing that, looking at the ratio of positive to negative emotional experiences that were most predictive of long-term relationship success. And the answer was, now obviously it depends on how you would measure an event and how you would measure positive and negative emotion. But that aside, the finding was something like, if you're in a relationship and you only have 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction, then the relationship will end. It's too negative. But if you have more than 11 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction, then it also ends. And you think, that's pretty bloody peculiar. Why in the world would that be? Don't you want like 100 to 1 positive to negative interactions? And the answer to that is, what makes you think that you want a relationship so that you can be happy? Or at least happy moment to moment? Why do you think that? It's certainly not the case. You know that too, because I bet you there's not a person in this room who hasn't rejected someone because they were too nice to them. Something like that. Person's no challenge. It's something like that. You want someone who, you know, you can get along with them, but now and then they bite you and you think, oh, that's interesting. You know, I didn't really expect that. And then you go and puzzle over it for a while and you torture yourself about it. And that's one of the things that keeps you really linked into the relationship. And the reason for that is that part of the reason that you want the relationship isn't so that you're happy right now. It's so that you can live a high quality life across multiple decades. And so you're looking for someone that you have to contend with, who's going to push you beyond what you already are, and who's going to judge you harshly often for your limitations. Now that'll make you angry and all of that, you know, and resentful, and maybe you'll take your revenge and all of that, but you don't want someone who thinks you're perfect in your current form, partly because why would you want to go out with someone that deluded? Well, you know, there used to be, before the divorce laws were really liberalized, you could sue for irreconcilable differences. And sometimes people do find themselves in that situation. It's like one person wants children and the other person doesn't. It's like, that's a tough one. It's a tough one to negotiate. So I'm certainly not saying that just because you lock yourself into like 2 cats in a barrel, that will make you solve your problems, because problems are hard to solve and sometimes you can't solve them. I was just pointing out what the cost of leaving the back door open is, and it's a big cost. And you know, one of the things I see too is that people's identities fragment increasingly across time. You know, one of the things that you have as you age is something like the continuity of your life. You know, you have someone that you're with, you've tied your story together with theirs, you have children, maybe they have children. It's like there's this continual payoff, so to speak, in quality that you obtain from staying within that frame. And you can jump out of that, and I suppose to some degree that provides freedom, but it isn't obvious to me that it does that for people.
But you're assuming that one specific relationship is high quality. It may not be.
No, but it's also the case that sequential relationships are unlikely to be that. So, look, I'm definitely not making a utopian case for marriage. So
I would like to hear the case for divorce from you, because it'd be really interesting, right? It's a strong point, but at the same time, I think there are relationships that are really low quality.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then insisting on them cannot be good.
Yeah, well, that's definitely the alternative argument, and of course there are strong things to be said on both sides, but see, there's some additional problems with divorce that people don't really grasp when they're young. Like the idea that you can be divorced once you have children, that's kind of a stupid idea, because you can't. You can find a limited substitute for your initial freedom. But if you have kids and you try to get divorced, the probability that that's going to demolish your life is very, very high. First of all, it's incredibly expensive. So one or both of you is going to come out of that poor. And your market value has declined. Let's say you're the woman who takes the kids. Your market value has declined radically. You're going to be poorer. The man, he's just as screwed, because he is now an indentured servant, and there's no escape from it. So it's not so bad if you can negotiate a peaceful separation, and some people can, but lots of times if you have a terrible relationship, it's not like negotiating a peaceful separation is all that easy. But if you're at each other's throats, good luck to you. I think it's roughly equivalent to having non-fatal cancer. It is not pleasant. It's a 10-year process, 15-year process. It'll cost you $250,000, and it'll tear a big chunk out of your life. And also, it will really disrupt your relationship with your kids. And you bring kids into a step-parent family, they do not do as well. Step-parents are not as good parents as biological parents, and the data on that is clear. Now, obviously, there are exceptions, because there are terrible biological parents, and there are wonderful step-parents. But if you look in aggregate, it's not that easy to care for children. You need everything you can binding you to them. And if they're someone else's children, mostly they get in the way of the person that you love, right? Well, let's say you have a child, I'll be right out. Let's say you have a child and I want to go out with you. Every second you spend with that child is the second you don't spend with me. And there's going to be a price for that. I'm not going to be happy about that. And if I have a child, you're going to feel exactly the same way. You might say, well, no, I love children. It's like, yeah, sure. Sure you do. I doubt it. You might love your child. And it's pretty specific the way that people love children. So, and the rate of abuse for kids in step-parent families is way higher than it is in biological families. There's not even any comparison.